After the movie ended, Claire cleaned the kitchen while Evan stayed behind, lost in thought. When she came back, he was gone. His door was half open, light spilling out into the hallway. She peeked in. He was sitting at his desk, writing something in a notebook. His face looked peaceful but serious. Claire didn't disturb him. She went to her room and sat on the bed, her thoughts heavy. She told herself she was imagining things, that the tension she felt between them wasn't real. But the heart doesn't lie easily. The next morning, she found him in the backyard watering the small garden she had planted years ago. The sight made her smile. He looked calm, focused, like someone trying to fix more than just plants. "Didn't know you liked gardening," she said, stepping outside. He looked over his shoulder. "You used to do this every morning before work. I just thought maybe I could help." She smiled. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," he said quietly. For a moment, they both stood there, sunlight falling softly between them. It felt strange, beautiful, and painful at once. Later that day, they cooked lunch together. Claire taught him how to knead dough for homemade bread. Their hands brushed a few times, and each time they both pretended not to notice. She could feel his quiet gratitude, his need for closeness, and it stirred emotions she didn't know how to name. They sat down to eat, and as they talked, she realized how mature he had become. He spoke about his studies, his future, his doubts. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm good enough," he admitted. "Everyone at school seems to have everything figured out, and I'm just trying to keep up." Claire reached across the table and touched his hand gently. "You don't have to have everything figured out, Evan. Nobody does. What matters is that you keep trying. You've come so far." He looked up, and for the first time in days, smiled like the boy she used to know. "Thanks, Claire. I needed to hear that." That evening, they decided to watch another movie. This time, the mood was lighter. They laughed more, teased each other about bad acting, and shared popcorn. For a few hours, everything felt normal again. But when the credits rolled, Claire felt a wave of nostalgia. She missed the days when family nights like this were common. When Mark was home more, when laughter filled the house without effort. Evan must have noticed her expression. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Just thinking. Life moves so fast, doesn't it?" "Yeah," he said. "But some things stay the same. Like this house. Like you." The way he said it, gentle but meaningful, made her heart skip. She smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. Before she could say anything, Mark's voice echoed from down the hall. He had just returned from his study, calling for her. Evan stood up quickly, his shoulders tensing. The moment vanished, replaced by a silence neither of them could explain. Claire answered her husband, forcing a smile, while Evan quietly slipped out of the room. That night, Claire sat on her bed, staring at the reflection of the moonlight on the floor. Her thoughts were tangled. She didn't want to read too much into anything. She cared deeply for Givenchy, always had, but lately, that care carried too many layers. Maybe it was simply the ache of seeing someone grow up and realizing time had changed everything. Still, she couldn't ignore the truth. There was something unspoken between them. Something that came from love, but not the kind that could ever be acted upon. It was a bond built on understanding, gratitude, and years of shared memories, a bond that both comforted and confused her. When she finally lay down, she could still hear the sound of the rain tapping gently against the window. She closed her eyes and thought of how quickly life changes, how easily love shifts its shape, how fragile hearts can be when people stop saying what they feel. In the quiet, she promised herself one thing: she would protect what they had. No matter how close they became, she would never let it turn into something that could hurt them. As she drifted off to sleep, one last thought crossed her mind. He's not the boy who needed me anymore. But maybe, for now, he still needs my heart to remind him that home can still be safe. And with that, the night fell silent again, holding its breath for whatever tomorrow might bring. The following weekend, the house felt strangely quiet. Mark had left for a 3-day work conference out of state, leaving Claire and Evan alone. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. Was calm, gentle, almost peaceful, but underneath that peace was something Claire didn't want to name. Saturday morning, Sunlight poured through the windows and Claire decided to make breakfast. She cooked eggs, toast, and coffee, humming softly as she worked. When Evan came downstairs, his hair slightly messy. Wearing a plain gray t-shirt, she felt that same tug in her chest, the one she kept trying to ignore. "Morning," he said, smiling faintly. "Morning," she replied. "You hungry?" "Always," he said, taking a seat at the table. They ate together quietly. It felt normal, almost like the old days before college had pulled him away. But there was something new in Izzy's thoughtfulness, mixed with an emotion she couldn't read after breakfast. Claire began washing the dishes, but she could feel him watching her. "What?" she asked lightly, turning around. He hesitated, then said, "You still hum the same tune when you cook." "You've been doing that since I was 16. She laughed softly. "Old habits never change." Evan smiled, but there was a sadness behind it. "Sometimes I wish they didn't have to." The words caught her off guard. Before she could ask what he meant, he stood and said, "I'll mow the lawn today. You shouldn't have to do all the work while Dad's gone." She nodded, grateful for the distraction. "Thank you, Evan. That would help." The rest of the morning passed quietly. Claire cleaned the house while Evan worked outside. From the kitchen window, she watched him push the mower across the grass, sunlight glinting off his shoulders. She admired his maturity, how much he'd grown, but also felt a pang of melancholy. He wasn't a boy anymore. By afternoon, the air turned warm and soft. Evan came in, wiping sweat from his forehead. "All done," he said. "Good job," she said, handing him a glass of cold lemonade. He drank, sighing with relief. "You always make this the best." She smiled. "Secrets in the sugar." He looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "You make everything better. You know that." The compliment hung between them longer than it should have. Claire felt a warmth rise in her chest, but she quickly turned away, pretending to tidy the counter. "You're just saying that because you're tired." He laughed softly, but didn't deny it. That evening, Claire decided to cook his favorite dinner creamy pasta with roasted vegetables. When she set the plate in front of him, Evan blinked in surprise. "You remembered?" "Of course," she said. "You used to ask for this every birthday." He smiled warmly. "You never forget anything." As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than it had in years. They talked about school, friends, and plans for the future. Evan spoke about his dreams, how he wanted to work in design. Maybe move to Seattle after graduation. Claire listened, proud and wistful at the same time. Then he said quietly, "I wouldn't be where I am without you, Claire." She looked at him, touched. "Evan, don't say that. You did the hard work yourself." He shook his head. "You don't get it. You were there when I needed someone to believe in me. You never gave up, even when I pushed everyone away. You saw something in me I didn't see in myself." His words were raw, honest. Claire's throat tightened. "That's what family does, Evan. We take care of each other." He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know. But lately, I don't know what we are anymore." Claire froze. The gentle rhythm of the conversation broke instantly. She didn't know how to respond, afraid of what he might mean or what she might feel. "Evan," she said carefully, "we'll always be family. Even if things feel different, that doesn't change." He nodded slowly, but his eyes told a different story. They finished dinner in near silence, both pretending everything was fine. Afterward, Evan insisted on washing the dishes. Claire let him, retreating to the living room. She sat on the couch, staring at the flickering candles she'd lit earlier. Her mind replayed his words. "I don't know what we are anymore." A storm began brewing outside. The wind picked up and thunder rolled in the distance. Claire hugged her knees to her chest, trying to calm the unease building inside her. Evan joined her a few minutes later, sitting quietly across the room. For a while, neither spoke. The sound of rain tapping against the windows filled the space between them. Finally, Claire said softly, "Evan, we need to talk about what you said." He looked up. "I didn't mean to make things weird. Sometimes I don't know how to act around you anymore. You're not just family. You're someone I look up to. He stopped himself, looking away. Claire's heart ached. She wanted to ease his confusion, to draw clear lines between affection and emotion, between gratitude and love, but she didn't want to hurt him either. Evan, she said gently, you've been through so much change. College life, everything, it can mix up how we feel about people. I care about you deeply, but sometimes our hearts confuse kindness with something else. He nodded, eyes glistening slightly. Maybe you're right, I just missed you so much. Claire's voice softened. And I missed you too. You'll always have a place in my heart, Evan. But we have to be careful with the kind of space we give those feelings. Rain whispered against the kitchen window that gray morning, the kind that made the world feel slower and quieter. Claire Henderson stood by the counter, carefully spreading a golden layer of lemon filling over the crust of her homemade pie. Baking had always been her comfort. Whenever she missed her husband, Mark, who traveled often for work, or when the house felt too empty, she baked. It filled the silence with warmth. Her stepson, Evan, had come home from college just a week ago. It had been nearly a year since she'd last seen him. He was 21 now, taller, his voice deeper, and his eyes more serious. She still remembered the awkward teenager he'd once been, shy and polite, barely speaking during dinner. But now he moved with quiet confidence, though something about him felt distant. She had noticed it every day since his return. He smiled when spoken to, helped with chores. But there was something hidden behind his calm eyes, something heavy he wasn't saying. Claire didn't press him. She knew people, especially young men, sometimes needed space before they opened up. That morning, after finishing the pie, she set it on the counter to cool. The scent of fresh lemon and sugar filled the air. Claire smiled, thinking how Mark used to tease her about always baking too much. You feed your feelings, he'd say lovingly. Maybe he was right. She glanced toward the living room where Evan's bag sat near the couch, caffeine-packed, as if he couldn't decide whether he truly belonged there or not. She went upstairs to fold laundry, humming softly. For a few peaceful minutes, she forgot about everything until she heard a soft clink downstairs. The sound of a fork on a plate. She paused, listening. When she stepped quietly down the stairs, her eyes caught sight of something that made her stop at the doorway. Evan stood in the kitchen, back turned to her, holding a small fork. He leaned slightly over the counter, cutting into the pie she had just made. It wasn't the act itself that caught her, was his expression. He wasn't just sneaking dessert. He looked thoughtful, almost troubled, like someone trying to understand something more than taste. Claire crossed her arms, leaning against the doorway. You could have just asked, she said gently. Evan jumped a little, turning around quickly. I was just making sure it was as good as I remembered, he said, embarrassed, his cheeks turning pink. She smiled, amused. Testing my baking skills again? He shrugged, trying to laugh it off. You always said feedback helps you improve. Claire walked over and took the fork from his hand playfully. You don't need to test it. I already know it's good. She sliced a small piece for him anyway and placed it on a plate. But next time, wait until I say it's ready. The best things take a little patience. He nodded, looking down. I'll remember that. For a moment, silence hung between them. Claire studied him. His hair was a little longer, curling at the edges. His jaw had grown stronger, but his eyes, those were still the same. Gentle, thoughtful, and always searching for approval. She realized then how much time had passed. When did that shy boy turn into this quiet young man who looked like life had already given him a few hard lessons? College treating you well? She asked softly, trying to sound casual. He gave a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It's fine, busy, sometimes lonely. She wanted to say something comforting but stopped herself. Instead, she nodded. Well, home's still the same. You always have a place here. He looked up at her, and for a second, there was something in his gaze that made her heart skip, a kind of warmth mixed with uncertainty. Then he looked away, focusing on the pie again. I missed your cooking, he said quietly. Claire smiled. You missed the food, not me. He chuckled softly, finally meeting her eyes. Maybe both. The words hung between them, simple yet heavy. Claire busied herself with cleaning the counter, but her thoughts were racing. She had always cared for Evan deeply, treated him as her own. But now the air between them felt different. Not inappropriate, not wrong, just charged with emotion, with memories. With the strange awareness of time passing and people changing. Later that afternoon, as the rain eased, they sat together in the living room. Claire worked on her laptop while Evan read a book. The quiet felt comfortable but unfamiliar, as though something unspoken lingered. She found herself glancing at him, wondering if he was truly okay. When Mark had married her, Evan was still learning to cope with his parents' divorce. Claire had tried her best to be patient, to listen when he didn't want to talk, to guide him without taking over. Over the years, they'd built a fragile but real bond. But college had changed him, and she wasn't sure where she fit in his world anymore. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She kept seeing that look on his face when she caught him in the kitchen. It wasn't mischief, it was longing. Not for her, but maybe for the warmth of home, for the feeling of being understood. She realized how easy it was to misread emotions when hearts were lonely. He wasn't testing her baking. He was testing the connection that time had faded but not erased. The next morning, Claire woke early, sunlight slipping through the blinds. She went downstairs and found Evan already up, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. He smiled politely. "Morning, morning," she replied, pouring her own. He hesitated, then said, "I'm sorry about yesterday. I shouldn't have touched the pie." Claire waved her hand. "Oh, don't be silly. It's just pie." He looked at her with quiet sincerity. "No, it's not that. I guess I just wanted to feel something normal again. School's been a lot. Seeing you here doing the same things, it reminded me that some things don't change." Claire felt a small ache in her chest. She sat across from him and said softly, "Sometimes when life gets hard, we look for small pieces of what we used to have. That's not wrong, Evan. It just means you still care." He nodded, and they both sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle between them. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The sky was clearing, and sunlight spread across the room. Claire smiled faintly. "How about we bake another one today?" Together, this time, Evan's face lit up with a small, genuine grin. "I'd like that." As they worked side by side in the kitchen, Claire felt the tension ease. The quiet bond between them returned not as something confusing or uncertain, but as something kind, steady, and healing. She realized then that love could take many shapes. What mattered was not the confusion of the moment, but the care behind it, the willingness to stay, to listen, and to rebuild what time had tested. By the time the second pie was out of the oven, the air smelled of sugar and forgiveness. Claire looked at Evan and thought maybe this summer was exactly what they both needed. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of something that would change both their hearts in unexpected ways. The week after the pie incident passed quietly. But something in the air had shifted. Claire felt it every time she walked into a room and found Evan there reading, cooking, or just sitting by the window with his headphones on. He didn't say much, but his presence filled the house in a way that made her both comforted and restless. One evening, she stood in the doorway, watching him fix a loose chair leg in the dining room. His hands were steady, his movements careful. She smiled, remembering how he used to struggle with the simplest chores when he was a teenager. Back then, he'd always ask for help, looking at her with those wide, uncertain eyes. Now, he barely needed her guidance. "Looks like college made you handier," she said. Evan looked up and grinned faintly. "Guess I had to learn how to survive on my own." His tone was casual, but the words stayed with her. Survive on my own. Claire realized how much he had grown while away. The boy who once depended on her for everything had turned into a young man who could stand on his own. Still, there was a small part of him that looked tired, lonely even, that night. While they were watching a movie together, Claire couldn't focus on the screen. Her mind kept drifting back to the first time she'd met Evan. He had been 15, quiet and cautious after his parents' divorce. He hadn't trusted her at first. He barely spoke to her for weeks. But one day, when his father was away on a business trip, found him sitting on the porch, looking sad. She had brought him hot chocolate and said, "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I'm here if you do." He had looked at her, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "Do I have to call you Mom?" She'd smiled and said, "Only if you want to. I'll answer to Claire too." He had smiled then, a small broken smile, and said, "Okay." Claire, that was the beginning of their bond, gentle, fragile but real now, sitting beside him years later. She wondered when that bond had become so complicated. Halfway through the movie, Evan spoke without looking at her. "You know, sometimes I miss the way things used to be, when everything felt simpler." Claire turned to him surprised. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Back then, home felt different." "I don't know." Warmer. Her chest tightened. "Things change, Evan. People grow. Life gets busy. But warmth doesn't disappear, just waits for us to notice it again." He nodded slightly, but didn't respond. They sat in silence, the soft glow from the TV flickering across their faces. He gave a small, broken smile. "You always know how to make things sound right." Thunder rumbled again, louder this time. The lights flickered. Claire stood and went to check the windows, making sure they were closed. "Looks like a stormy night," she said quietly. When she turned back, Evan was still sitting there, staring at the floor. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he said. "You didn't," she assured him. "You're just being honest, and that's a good thing." He nodded, finally standing. "I think I'll head to bed. Long day." "Good night, Evan," she said softly. "Good night, Claire." When he disappeared down the hallway, Claire let out the breath she'd been holding. She walked over to the window, watching lightning streak across the sky. Her reflection looked older, sadder, but also stronger. She whispered to herself, "He's growing up. He's just searching for where he belongs." Deep down, she knew that was true. What he felt wasn't wrong knit, was human. Sometimes when people share love and history, feelings blur. But she also knew what her role was. She was his anchor, his safe place, not his confusion. That night, as the rain poured outside, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would help him find his path, even if that meant keeping her heart guarded. In the end, love didn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it meant knowing exactly when to let go gently, before anyone got lost in what could never be. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air cool and quiet. The world outside looked washed clean, sunlight shining through the wet leaves. Claire woke early, her thoughts heavy but calm. The night before had been emotional. And though neither she nor Evan had said anything wrong, she knew things had changed between them. Something had finally settled, something both tender and painful. She walked downstairs to find the kitchen empty, the house strangely still. On the counter, beside the coffee pot, lay a folded piece of paper. Her name was written on it in Evan's familiar handwriting. Her heart skipped. She picked it up and read, "Claire, thank you for everything you've done for me. I came home this summer confused, trying to find who I was. You gave me more than comfort, you gave me peace. I don't want to make things hard for you or for Dad. I think it's time I go back early. Focus on school and learn to stand on my own again. You've been my family, my strength, and my home. I'll never forget that. Evan." For a long time, Claire stood there in silence, the letter trembling in her hand. She sat down slowly, her eyes stinging. She wasn't sad because he was leaving. She was sad because it meant something beautiful had reached its end. She had always known this day would come, but part of her had hoped it might last just a little longer. She took a deep breath and smiled faintly through her tears. "He's doing the right thing," she thought. "He's growing up." When she looked out the window, she saw his car already gone. No long goodbye, no drawn-out farewell. Just a quiet decision made with respect. It hurt, but it also felt right. The next few days passed slowly. The house felt emptier than before. His laughter missing from the kitchen, his footsteps gone from the stairs. Even the evenings felt different. The silence had a weight to it. But instead of letting it break her, Claire turned that emptiness into something meaningful. She cleaned the house, baked again, and filled her days with little projects. Every small thing reminded her of him, the pie dish he'd used, the half-empty jar of sugar, the garden he'd helped trim. But rather than ache, those memories warmed her. One afternoon, while watering the plants, she caught herself smiling. "He's going to be okay," she whispered. "He's finding his own way." 2 weeks later, she received a call. It was Evan Clare. His voice said softly over the line. Her heart lifted. "Evan, how are you?" "I'm good," he said, sounding lighter, happier. "I started working part-time at the campus bakery." "Guess your pie lessons finally paid off." She laughed. "I knew they would. You always had a good touch with dough." He chuckled. "I don't know about that, but people like what I make. I even taught one of the girls how to do your lemon pie recipe. She said it's her favorite now." "That's wonderful," Claire said, genuinely smiling. "I'm proud of you." There was a small pause. "I just wanted to thank you again," he said quietly, "for not giving up on me, for giving me more than I deserved." "You deserved every bit of it, Evan," she said gently. "All I did was remind you of who you are." His voice softened. "You did more than that. You gave me a place to belong." After a moment, she replied, "You'll always have one, no matter how far you go." They talked for a few more minutes about his classes, his plans, how Mark was doing. When the call ended, Claire sat back and let out a slow breath. For the first time in weeks, her heart felt light. Later that evening, Mark returned from his trip. He noticed the calm smile on her face as they ate dinner. "You seem peaceful," he said. Claire nodded. "I think I am." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Evan told me you really helped him these past weeks. Thank you for that." She squeezed his hand gently. "He just needed someone to listen. That's all." Mark smiled, proud. "You've always had that gift." That night, after cleaning up, Claire stood by the kitchen window. The moon hung low and bright, reflecting off the glass. She thought about all the years she'd spent trying to be a good stepmother, patient, understanding, careful. It hadn't been easy, but in the end, it had mattered. She hadn't just raised a boy. She'd helped shape a man who now knew how to stand on his own. And that was love, not the kind that demanded or expected, but the kind that gave quietly and asked for nothing in return. The next morning, she found an old photo on the fridge. It was from Evan's high school graduation. Him, Mark, and her all smiling arms around each other. She ran her fingers over the picture and laughed softly. "We made it," she whispered. Days turned into weeks, and life found its rhythm again. She and Mark spent evenings talking on the porch, watching the sun go down. Sometimes she would tell him stories about Evan as a teenager, the silly mistakes, the late-night talks, the small victories. Mark always smiled and said, "You two always understood each other better than anyone." She would simply nod, knowing it was true. Months later, a small package arrived in the mail. Inside was a note and a jar of lemon pie filling. "Claire, thought you might like this. It's not as good as yours, but I'm getting closer." Evan, tears filled her eyes as she read it. She set the jar on the shelf, proud and content. That evening, she baked again one more pie, golden and sweet, just the way he liked it. As it cooled on the counter, she looked out the window and smiled at the sunset. She realized something then. Love didn't always end in grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes it ended quietly with understanding, growth, and the courage to move forward. Evan had come home searching for something, and she had given him what she could not romance. Not promises, but strength, patience, and faith. That was the more she had given him. And in return, he had given her peace. The kind that comes when you know you've done right by someone you love. As she cut a small piece of pie for herself, she whispered softly, "He tested my heart. And I gave him more. More care, more hope, more reason to believe in himself." The kitchen filled with the familiar smell of lemon and sugar, and for the first time in a long while, Claire felt complete. Because even though he was gone, his presence still lingered in every recipe. Every quiet morning, every small act of kindness she offered the world. And she knew that was what real love looked like. Not the kind that holds on too tight, but the kind that lets go beautifully.